Everyone, welcome back. Pardon the absence. I stopped after about 60 episodes of the daily for a year because what was happening is I was forgetting to do my children's homework with them. So that was telling me I was spreading myself a bit thin. So I had to step back from that whole YouTube thing as far as the daily ones went. Recently, I was a friend of mine on Discord, Hikiko Omori. I think that's I think that's how you say that. He said he was reading through the Ethiopian Bible, the book of Genesis, and he was seeing God as a tyrannical figure. And I'm like, well, maybe we can talk about that because you can sort of see him like that, but I think it's a little bit different than that. So what I'm going to do, what I'm going to try to do for both of our benefits, because we're having some issues getting like synergizing our stream times, is I'm going to try to as best as I can, go through Genesis, the first three chapters of Genesis at least, and we can go from there and try to give my take on it as to why I think it's like the building blocks of civilization. Uh, it's one of the best things that can unify mankind as far as a starting point and an end point. Because usually, what nostalgia does, you're feeling for something long ago that you really long for. It's called, if you ever read the book Surprised by Joy by C.S. Lewis, it's the same kind of thing. You can look back in your life, everybody has this moment where you think, you know what, that was really good. Like, everybody has this moment. Just think about that yourself. And you have that moment, and you try to, throughout your life, you try to recreate that moment. And so you can have that as a culture, too. The Garden of Eden. You have the chaos outside, that's the jungle, and then you have the beauty of the garden within, and you try to recreate what that looks like, however that looks like in the future. It won't be the exact same because people grow and things change, but it can rhyme with that, right? That's why I think as far as religious stories goes, because religion and the myth, those are the things you aim at. They're always in the abstract. The reason why that is important is the same reason why we value things like numbers, like the number 4. What is that? Can you see the number 4 concretely? Well, no, not really. You can see it demonstrated, right? 4 fingers, that's demonstrated, but as far as the abstract goes, those kind of things cannot be seen per se. You can see the evidence thereof, but you don't know what they are. Same with gravity. You see what gravity does, magnetism. You can see its effects, but like, what is it? Same with the cells in your body. Like, what on earth makes all those things do exactly what they do? And the further in you go, as far as the deconstructionism, deconstructing all the individual parts, the more you're like, why on earth does that do that? And eventually you get to such a simplistic point of it that the laws of physics break down. And so you have to kind of look at an agency or maybe something you can't understand, and you can kind of get your way to God at that point, at least as far as I can tell. But that's a side note, that's a tangent. I know there are some stories in creation that are much older than Genesis and the Mesopotamian stories as well. The point of myth, the point of reaching for something as an ideal, and you see the evidence thereof, is that you always have to be reaching the concept of heaven, at least in the Judeo-Christian worldview, the concept of, the life beyond this life, you could look at it that way, is something you're always striving for. Anytime that man tries to take something that he views as heaven, or heavenly, or perfect, and try to make it here on earth, it's already been proven to be the biggest debacle you could possibly see. Nietzsche saw this when he wrote his Madman parable, and communism is a very good example of that, and socialism always leads to communism. That's just kind of how it is. You lose the value of the individual, and because you lose the value of the individual, the state becomes the new lead as far as the hierarchy goes, and the state can do whatever it wants at the expense of the individual for the individual's sake, including eradicating certain people that maybe shouldn't exist. Who's to make that call, really, right? It's always an individual. It's not the mass, because the masses, you can't have a relationship with the mass or the mob. It always has to be down to an individual. But anyway, we should probably get to Genesis at this point. I'm going to start at chapter 1, and what you should see on your screen, at least off to the side there, is this is taken from the King James Version. Now, as far as versions of the Bible go, there are some that kind of deviate a lot from the translation. We have authentic copies of the Bible from the year 300 AD. We have manuscripts that are pieced together before that, and this is not going to be a take on authenticity of Bible translation. There are scholars you can go to for that. This is going to be just for the meaning of the text and why that should apply to life. The Bible itself is a very unifying document when it came out. It was one of the first books you would learn to read from. People would go to church in our culture. Our culture is, as far as I can tell, a culture of political will, undergirded by the philosophy that mankind is given dignity by his creator. Now, how exactly do you see that in reality? Well, I guess you kind of don't. But you see the evidence thereof. If you give the individual dignity and you give him the ability to succeed or fail with the dignity that he is given, the entire society can flourish. And you give them like a competitive way to establish their own hierarchy in the capitalism sect, but at the same time punishing them if they go away from where our creator, who gives us dignity, has established us to flourish, if that makes sense. Human flourishing, the individual human flourishing, is not the whole point, right? Because if only human flourishing, only making more people was the whole point, then we would have a lot less laws as far as marriage goes, that's for sure. But it's not only human flourishing, not only reproduction, but it's also leading the best significant life that you could possibly lead, and leaving it to the full. So you take your nature, what you're given, because, I mean, cats, this guy right here, cats have nature. They can't choose to violate it. They are living their full cat life in a fallen world. Maybe you can look at it like that. And it's not like they're going to deviate from it. Cats will act like cats. Barring trauma, obviously, you can destroy a cat's nature by traumatizing it, just like you can any being. When you unleash malevolence upon it, suddenly everything is evil to the cat, and everything is evil to whatever the being is, and you can just see anxiety and reasons not to trust reality in everything. So you're constantly in this anxious state of being, and that's not good. That's not the ideal, obviously. So we try to stay away from that, and you try to aim for a life that's ideal. I think the Bible, especially Genesis, really establishes that. So I'm going to start in Genesis chapter 1. I'm going to try to do a chapter per video, and try to, I guess, make the case why every single story, borrows from this one. And I would even argue, and I'm going to try to do a talk on the stories of the religions and how they've affected mankind's thinking. I would even argue that unless they appeal to this story specifically, you won't be interested in it. So, let's dive into Genesis. This Bible is significant to me because it was given to me by a guy from Sudan. He celebrates his birthday on January 1st, along with like 20 of his brothers. He told me that once he went away to a marketplace and he came back to his town village after going to the marketplace and they were all mowed down. And I'm like, what? Why? He's like, well, the guerrillas came in, they shot everybody up and just took all their stuff. I'm like, why didn't they fight back? So the government takes our guns, so we can't fight. It's Second Amendment stuff right there. I'm like, that is frustrating, man. Like, what do you do with that? And so what happened is he was literally saved by the missionaries, him and his crew, his brothers. They all call each other brothers. They're brought to America after all that happened. And they are like some of the hardest working, gentle people. So he saw me praying at my table once. He's like, come eat with us. And then like a couple days later, he's like, I have a gift for you. Here's a Bible. So I've been reading out of this Bible ever since. It's a nostalgic thing for me. I was extremely honored by him to give me this book. I have other Bibles. I have a giant one from, I think, like the late 1800s back there in my reading room. Anyway, that's why I'm going to be using this specific version. It's special to me, and I don't think the meaning is lost, barring grave mistranslation, like the Latter-day Saints, the Book of Mormon. You got to be careful with that one. The Watchtower Bible, you have to be very careful with that one. All the apocryphal things. The reason, as far as I can tell, that the apocryphal Bible, at least the books in the Apocrypha, are not part of canon. Some of them are in the Catholic faith, is because they've already been sort of proven as being just trustworthy. One of the things that always comes to me is like one of the ways they tested the authenticity of the New Testament specifically is they looked at like the names, like the name Luke and the name Paul, saw what names were popular per se during that time, and they did not match on the apocryphal books like 1st, 2nd Maccabees and Enoch and all those other ones. So you just got to be careful with that. The Bible that we have right now is pretty. It's kind of the way to go. So I'll start at Genesis chapter 1. That was a pretty long intro. The history of creation. The first book of Moses. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So I think that sounds right, and that's very Taoistic. If you get into like Confucius and the Tao Te Ching, this is the concept of chaos and order dwelling together. And I know in the Mesopotamian stories you have, I think it's Ansu and Tiamat. They're mixing together. The second there's a divide between the two, that's when creation happens. And that's like the relationship between the infinite and the finite. And that's the concept of words and language too. The second you, in all of chaos, because chaos is everything and nothing at the same time, the second you make one thing different from everything else, well, now you have a relationship. You have a relationship between the finite and the infinite. Right? So that's, again, the garden in the jungle. It's amazing how many layers this kind of story has as you go through time and you look in the Bible. And if you want to research the fine-tuning of the universe and how this is important there too, you look at the like Stephen Meyer's Return of the God hypothesis, where he starts going into the specifics needed for creation to be. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the deep. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, and the light was good. And God divided light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. So the first thing he does is he adds light into the picture. So what's light? Light is perception. The first thing you need to do is see. The first thing you need to do is perceive reality. How do you do that? Well, with light, and that's illuminating what is as opposed to what is not. Again, the creation of the universe, the way that hydrogen works, it's really fascinating to calculate the possibilities that our universe should be opaque as opposed to transparent. It's really neat that we can actually see as far as we do it with our eyes. I'll tell you something else really neat about light, and I learned this from Jordan Peterson, reading books on mathematics. Light is two-dimensional. It's here and there at the same time. It doesn't really care how fast it's going. But what's really interesting is it always needs a place to go. Light always needs a place to go. So if you stand up and you look at a star, the light you see from that star would have never existed if your eye was not there to catch it. So think about that for a couple years. As far as consciousness goes in experiencing reality, that light would not have existed unless you were there to see it. So what is reality without consciousness? Well, that's a heck of a thing to think about. Infinite consciousness versus finite consciousness. Now, as far as days go, I'm not too concerned about this. There are entire books based on days. I know it's just a firmament of time. If you logarithmically add up all of time, they got to something like 13.8 billion years is how old the universe is. For every day period in here, logarithmically, from what I understand, it's been a while since I read Stephen Meyer's book, it actually adds up to like 13.8 billion, or roughly around there, give or take a few 100,000 years, but like in the grand cosmos of things, is that really important? Perhaps not. So now we're on verse 6. Then God said, let me go back. God said, "Let there be light," and God saw the light, and it was good. So here's where you get your definition of good. What is good? If you ever hear somebody say something like, oh my gosh, I got so much cat hair on me. Thanks, buddy. If you ever hear someone say something like, that is good, that is bad, what are they saying really? What is good and what is evil? How do you know evil when you see it? Well, you can kind of feel it, right? Somebody cutting off your arm, that seems pretty evil. Especially if it's with malicious intent, they want to hurt you. It seems like maliciousness and evil go hand in hand. Like evil is intentional. It's one thing to have tragedy. It's one thing for something bad to happen, like a car falls on you. Like who knows how that'll happen. It's another thing for someone to push a car onto you, like in malevolence. That's evil. It's willingly conscious act done to you. So what is good? What good, as far as I can tell, established here in the 4th verse of Genesis chapter 1, is purpose. Goodness is purpose. Now it's an appeal to purpose. What is good? Good could be relative. I think strawberry ice cream is pretty good. Somebody else might not. But as far as ultimate good and ultimate purpose, that's what we're striving for. We're striving for eternity forward. Right? One of my, and maybe I can get to this later, one of my renditions of how heaven looks like. And I actually got this from thinking about the Lateralis by Tool, out of all things, like over and over again, because I did a philosophical outworking of that song, is heaven is like a constant fractaling out of adventure. And the reason, one of the ways I got to that was like, if you look at a 4-year-old and they're trying to write letters, they cannot see angles. They can't see diagonals. So if they make an A, they make an A like this. And they have to put a line here. It's like a square. They can't see angles. They literally cannot perceive angles. They can't perceive diagonals. It just doesn't work with them. So you and I are at a specific point in time and space, and we are limited by our lifespan. So if you take away time from that, like, what could we possibly understand after that? Now, maybe that's beyond our thinking, and I think it is. But it is something to think about. Heaven as being a constant fractaling out of adventure. Constant renewal with diving into the darkness or a little bit of chaos and then coming back to structure and order. Anyway. This is verse number 6, chapter 1. Then God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." So now we're again we're making divisions in structure. God made the firmaments to divide the waters, which were under the firmaments, from which waters which were above the firmaments, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. So the evening and the morning were the second day. You make the sky and the land heaven, that which is above. We're establishing hierarchy, what is above. Verse 9, then God said, "Let the waters under the heavens, be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. It's more divisions, more hierarchy. And God called the dry land earth, and the gatherings together of the water he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Again, purpose, seeing that it is good. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in it itself on the earth." And it was so. And this is something you'll see quite a lot. It's according to its kind. And this is where I think the evolution I think is a great model. I think it's just incomplete. According to its kind, right? So felines go a certain way. A feline, whether it be a lion or this little cat on my lap, they act a certain way. They won't just suddenly become... You won't have a cat give birth to dogs. Like, this is where evolution, like, it doesn't leap like that. It seems like there has to be an agency that kind of pokes and prods and molds a specific way that gets to there. Because when's the last time you saw a fish with like 4 fins? It's not like evolution. It's not like life itself. It's constantly spitting out all this stuff randomly. You just have blobs, or we'd have give birth to kids with like random legs and stuff all over the place. Because you need millions of those mutations to actually come together and say, okay, you know what? This structure lives more so than the other ones do. So maybe we should keep with this. And then that's even assuming that DNA has a consciousness and a purpose to begin with. Like, why aren't we just giant one-celled hermaphroditic amoebas? What's the point of all these fingers and facial hair and all this other stuff? You know, it's assuming there is purpose in design. Now, even if it is the design just to survive the elements or to survive each other, it still assumes a purpose. So assuming a purpose assumes goodness according to that purpose, and that's where you get the argument with when it comes to humanism, purposing according to flourishing. So now we're at verse 12. And the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the third day. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and for years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give the light on the earth." And it was so. And that was verse 15 that we were just at. So a couple things I learned from reading Stephen Hawking and Einstein is, in the theory of relativity, time is impossible without light. So if there were no other lights, like one of the arguments here is like, how can there be a day without a sun if the greater light was not created? Well, there wouldn't be no time without light. So light had to be in existence according to this abstract theory, right, which we can see the evidence of. Light had to be there before anything else, before time to exist. You had to have light. So that's something we're thinking about, right? The fact that this book was written so many thousands of years ago, saying that light came first. As time emerged, light had to come first. I mean, that's a heck of a thing, man. The other thing I learned in Stephen Hawking, and this is in the nutshell of time, it's like a brief synopsis of a brief history of time, which I'm going to get to, but it's a heck of a monster, man. And I'm not a mathematician, so I'm not passionate about putting that in the top of my reading list. I'm more into philosophy and theology, and trying to live a good life myself, which is why I like martial arts, and to help others live, I guess, to their spiritual potential as well. But in order to get there, you need something that binds people together, like unifies people, not binds them as like chain. Well, yeah, it is actually chains. It binds you to the appropriate thing. It's a marriage does that. It binds you to the appropriate person, or rather, it makes you stay in a relationship with them. But that's getting kind of off topic. But it's kind of the same thing. You get to choose what you bind yourself to and what lives you forward. And this is why the religious stories are so important. They are the things you stand on and go forth from there. I'm wrestling with the Gita right now. That's Indian thought, and that's Mahatma Gandhi. I mess up the pronunciation of the first word, but anyway, Gandhi. He's a pretty famous character, and he liked the Sermon on the Mount. He liked Christ. Christians, however, were not. It's the same thing that Nietzsche said. Your followers have to look a little bit more saved before I'm going to count you as my savior, and that fair enough. That's pretty true. When was the last time you saw an authentic Christian, not just a person who went to church on Sundays and then drank 6 other days out of the week? Like, that's an extreme example for sure. But if you have a relationship with Christ, which is kind of what I'm going at as far as this goes, or relationship with God, you could start there. That's deism. Then you get to theism. That's the goal. The goal is not to get your butt in a pew. It's to have a relationship with Creator and purpose itself, being itself, understanding what goodness is, and aiming up. Jordan Peterson had a great line in the movie What is a Woman? And if you haven't seen that, that's worth seeing. He was talking about gender-affirming therapists. That's like a disease-affirming doctor. Like, no matter what you say, you're right. Yes, you're sick with that. You looked it up on Google? Go ahead. You want a prescription? Like, no one does that. Like, he said, I am on the, as a therapist, he said, I am on the side of you that wants to aim up. I don't know what that looks like, but we're going to figure it out. And that sounds pretty fair. We want to aim toward purpose and goodness for the individual and for everybody at the same time. But it starts with the individual. So then we get to verse 16. It says, Then God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmaments of the heavens to give light on earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So goodness is purpose. So it fulfilled his purpose. So the evening and the morning were on the 4th day. And that's verse 19. Okay. Now, one of the reasons that, what is this? I read it in a book called, I think it's about Paul Copan, called Is God a Moral Monster? He makes the case, and I think it's a good one. One of the things that Moses was trying to do is he's trying to separate the Israelites from the concept of worshiping the heavenly beings, like the suns and the stars. So he didn't name the sun. He didn't name the stars. He didn't name the moon. He just said the greater light to rule the day. Like, he was trying to take impersonal deification, I don't know how you look at it, but deification away from the elements and put it more to an abstract person, which is a relation with Yahweh, right? With a relationship with a God, with the God that wanted to set his people free. That's the idea. So now we're at verse 20. And then God said, Let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens. So God created great sea creatures, and every living thing that moves, with which waters abounded according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. So the evening and the morning were the 5th day. And this is life itself. Beyond the trees, carbon-based life, mammals, fish. One of the things I got from reading Job, and actually reading Carl Jung's take on Job, at least a little bit of it, is the concept of what is needed for being to be. In the book of Job, maybe we'll touch on this later, the whole concept of every single person that talks in there, except for God, is that if you do well, reality will bless you. And that's very Occidental. It's very west of Eden type of philosophy. Usually east of Eden, it's a very matriarchal type of structure as far as the god pantheon goes. Mother Earth is what's in charge, and you have to sacrifice to her to appease her, or she will ruin you. And once you get west of Eden, which it is actually kind of a dividing line as far as the religious aspects goes, once you get west of Eden, it's more like, here's where you aim at. And it's more of a patriarchal structure in the god pantheon. Here's what you aim at. If you aim properly, you will be rewarded. But if you don't, the world will have you. And God will just put his hands up and be like, all right, enjoy your time by yourself unblessed. You against the world. You are John Wick now. Good luck. I hope your skill set's pretty strong, man. And that's the main division between the two, as far as I can tell. So what I got from Job, the reason I went down that line is Job wants to know why he's cursed. Why are bad things happening to me if I've been so good? And God answers him with a whole bunch of questions that he cannot answer. Like, where were you when I made the world? Like, how do you... what I got is the summary of the questions that God gave back to Job is, how do you know what it takes for being to be? Like, how do you know that this is not just part of the process of being? It's one of the mantras that God takes all evil and makes it for his good. Well, again, what is evil? So goodness is purpose. Evil is violation of purpose, and that's maybe the snake in the garden too, which we'll hopefully get to. But that's, you take perfect order, perfection. Nothing ages and nothing happens in perfection. Heaven forbid you walk into a perfect house and step on the carpet. The carpet's already finely combed in a certain direction. Like, you feel like you're violating the place just being there because it's so perfect and ordered. But you need a little bit of disorder for life to exist. So it seems to me like Eden, which again we'll get to, the proper way you want to have your life molded is you establish a protected house that you can have play in, like fair play. Because with play is a little chaos, right? You bump yourself. You're seeing what you're made of. You're seeing, and that's Job again. You're seeing what can righteousness withstand adversity? What is righteousness if not tested? Is it really righteousness, or are you just kind of happy as long as everything is perfect around you? Or are you righteous and good even when things are down? And so in the nature of being, you get these giant creatures, perhaps. Like, sometimes they'll wash up on, or like the anglerfish. That thing looks freaking weird, dude. It scares the crap out of you. There's things in the sea we have not seen yet. So that tells me if life is allowed to flourish in the dark, then perhaps things will grow that we don't want to really look at, even with light. Or maybe we do, and maybe we should. Maybe we should explore the depths of our oceans before we go out into the clarity of the unknown. I don't know. But I just like the concept of the nature of life sometimes grows beyond where you think it should. And that's because life itself has to be tested. Life is constantly fighting against the elements. Like, we are in such a Goldilocks place, it is ridiculous. And if you don't think that, I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, verse 24. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth a living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beast of the earth, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. Now, that was verse 27 I just finished with. That is significant right there. No other scripture will put male and female on par with each other as created in the image of God, given dignity equally. Now, the dignity is equal, the roles are different. So if you think, again, we'll get to Garden of Eden, I'll explain it again, because it's worth explaining again. The ideal, and my wife and I had this conversation, we were talking about the concept of women voting. In an ideal world, you, as a masculine figure, you represent the garden walls, and you keep the jungle out, and you see what might come in. Because you want the inside, the beauty to flourish. That's very feminine. You want the feminine role to nurture life. Because with the relationship between the masculine and the feminine, the dividing wall that divides the protective inside of the castle or the garden from the outside chaotic jungle that'll destroy them, destroys the beauty. The relationship between those two, well, it sprouts life. That's where life comes from. So you have, that's again the order you want to establish is a place where you can play. That's the ideal. And life gets a little bit more serious once you get past the play point. That's the whole, as far as I can tell, the movie Peter Pan. We tell ourselves these stories over and over again. They're so interesting, and they make us pay attention to them. So in those roles, if a man represents his house to the outside, then the masculine and the feminine should be in agreement. Should women be allowed to vote? Well, yeah, perhaps. But if it's a family unit voting, and this is just in the voting concept, then this is the ideal. I'm not trying to take dignity away from women as far as that goes, but in the ideal, you would have one vote for your house. So you should be in agreement on this stuff. And the Muslims have a saying where the wife turns the head. She is the one who tells the man what to pay attention to. And so there's significance in that for sure. But the ideal is men deal with the outside terrors. We're kind of built for it. We're built for work. And the feminine, that's where children get their identity in their mother's eyes. They smile. They are closer. Women are closer to innocence. And the relationship between the masculine and the feminine, man and woman, is both the idea that you subject yourself to something else that's worth more than you are. So the masculine to the feminine, life is literally inside of Eve. So we subject ourselves to that and we truly love her. From the feminine to the masculine, this garden would not exist unless you were there to protect it. So I need to respect you for that, because you will literally give your life for me. I mean, that's a heck of a relationship, man. And so when we have things that, when we have a state that guarantees that, instead of the individual man or the individual woman. Like you give a bunch of foster homes for kids. That's what the government does. Or you put all these laws in place if you violate a woman. Those are good things, right? For those that are left. But having them as the standard ideal, that's not the ideal. The ideal is the family unit itself, the relationship between the family. So no other book gives dignity to the individual. And then this is why the whole transgender thing is just it's such a nuclear bomb as far as foundational stability goes in psychology and in spiritual growth. It destroys your role. You need to understand wherever you are now, barring there's maladies and there's cancers, and that's the nature of life. And maybe we're giving ourselves these cancers with the foods we eat and the stuff we're putting in the air and the vaccines, and who knows, man. But you have to understand what your duty is to life to help life flourish. God said it is good. Goodness is like the plumb line that you have to ride on in order for life to be, for being to be. And when you step outside of that, or when you take the fringes and you make the fringes normal, you're taking that plumb line, you're moving it over here. So now your center is right on the edge. And if you jump off the center, well, you just kind of jump into darkness. And we see that. We see that at various places, especially India. And it's also apparent in Rome, and it's apparent in a bunch of other places. There's two, I would say maybe three, but two giant cultural evidences that a country is about to be ruined, or at least weakened to the point where they can be overrun. The first one's sexual depravity. Once there's no sacredness in marriage, that's it. Property, I would say, is the half one, but I don't think that's prevalent in all cultures. Property is sacred. Once property is no longer sacred, the government can do whatever it wants with your money. Well, that's a problem. The second one for sure is child sacrifice. Once you're sacrificing your children for the sake of convenience, like abortion, or I know in India they had the Aryans where they would literally grow them just to cut off pieces of their limbs to have various crops. This is documented in India. You can look it up. I got a lot of that from reading Joseph Campbell. The Sound of Freedom just came out. That's another one that I listened to the guy the movie's based on. He would say how kids are literally grown for the sex industry, and then once they are too old or broken for it, their organs are harvested. Like, that's a heck of a thing, man. And that's violating God's social norm. That's child sacrifice. You don't sacrifice the next generation for the present. It's the other way around. You sacrifice yourself. This is a Thomas Paine quote. Rather, we want war and adversity to come on our end so our children don't have to deal with it. That's the proper way to deal with that situation. That's a very masculine way to deal with it as well. So all that to say, 4 or 5,000 years ago when this was written, to give dignity equally to the roles of the masculine, the male, and the female. That's even the Code of Hammurabi doesn't even touch that, and we can compare it between the Bible and that as well. But like, the Judeo-Christian worldview is still the best option we got, as far as I can tell. There are no other options. There are other options, and they're terrible. You put it that way. This is verse 28. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "See, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food. Also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, in which there is life. I have given every green herb for food." And it was so. Then God saw everything that had made. Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. So very good. What is that? Well, that's like multiple layers of purpose. I have a few Seventh-day Adventist friends which use this to make the case that man was originally intended to be vegetarian. And I can agree with that. Perhaps originally, before the fall, I myself am on the carnivore diet, so I literally, not all the time, I cheat. I like ice cream and cake and pie, but for the most part, I just eat meat or animal products, so like cheese, milks, liver, also meat technically, but I've never felt healthier in my life, and that's like a progression. Later on, when it comes to the Cain and Abel story, their sacrifices are a little bit different. You have Cain sacrificing of the fruit of the earth, and you have Abel sacrificing the lamb. And so what happens is, that's like in other cultures, that's a parallel of the cultivation of man usurping the hunting lifestyle, something like that. And that's actually evident in Native America. That's evident in a bunch of cultures in Africa. They have stories like this where it's time to focus on agriculture as opposed to the hunting nomadic lifestyle. And that's how we'll flourish in cities. And that was given to mankind like throughout the planet within the same like 300-year time span, even though they didn't have communication with each other. It's really interesting and weird and cool at the same time. So that was the end of chapter 1. From what I can tell, this is the goodness foundation. So when we look at good and evil going on, and this is something that you, again, challenge people with that question, and yourself, what is good and what is evil? How do you get your definition? Do you, as a relativist, say, I know what is good and evil because I am that I am? Like, you have to have a point of reference. If it's yourself, then, Lord help the world if that's how everything is going to be. We would just, why even communicate with language? I know what my word means to me. How dare you not say the same thing? You know what? Like, power is the only answer to that. This is why the pronoun thing is so weird, too. There's nothing that binds good and evil anymore. And no one is willing to subject themselves to objective criticism. Now, how do you get objective criticism? Well, you look at the evidence thereof. There is objective reality, as far as I can tell. For example, would the sun exist if you think it didn't? Right? When it comes to cultures can judge what is good and what is bad to a point. But when it comes to what is simplistic enough to have humans flourish and live their lives accordingly without having mass genocide, chaos, rape, pillaging, etc., there are certain rules that are in place, and you violate them at your peril. Life doesn't get better when you do. You might test the waters here and there. That's we're taking a little bit out of the complete 100% order. Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life, is very good. The Antidote to Chaos. But his second book is also good. It's Beyond Order and Antidote to Chaos. And then he wrote a second book. I got that totally wrong. First book is 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. The second one is Beyond Order. So it's like your life is too ordered. You need to have a little bit of flexibility in there in order, to have creation happen, something like that. And that's a little bit of a duality that we can get into once we start talking about the Tao Te Ching, if we ever get there. And the whole idea of, you get the yin-yang symbol, right? That is a duality per se, but at the same time, it's a complete circle. Agency had to start that. That's the relationship between order and chaos and the masculine and the feminine. It's all right there. That's the Tao they talk about in the Tao Te Ching. It's duality, sure, but again, something had to start that. there had to be an outside agency. That's where you get the Trinitarian concept as well. So that'll do it for chapter 1 of Genesis, as I brush cat hair off myself. I hope that breaks down a little bit of it. I don't know how often I will do these, but I think they're worth doing. If anything, it helps me articulate a little bit of what I think I know. And try to, one of my goals is I'd like to talk with others, specifically one-on-one, about having a relationship with God and being, with a capital B. What does it mean to be? What is consciousness? How do you understand your duty to life? What gives you positive emotion? You need, one of the ways we measure positive emotion, at least the best ways, is your pursuit toward a goal. And so, what could be more valuable than trying to understand what an eternal goal would be? And then you can aim toward that. And that might give you something called joy, which is beyond happiness. It's like it's something you always carry with you forever. It's eternal inside of you. And you can pass it on. And it's infinite. And it's awesome. So I hope that helps. Hey, Kiko, leave your feedback in the comments. I would love it if you guys enjoyed this. Click the like button and subscribe. I appreciate you watching. God's best to you, and I'll see you later.